Welcome, everyone. I can see the participation number going up, so I know that people are still rolling in, but out of respect for everyone's valuable time, all of you who are participating, Tim and Kit for speaking with us today, I'm going to go ahead and just begin introducing this conversation so that we can get the most out of our time together today as possible. So I want to thank everyone who is joining us today from across the country and the world. I'm Alexander, and as CEO of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., I just so appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. Conscious Capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to change both the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization catalyzing that movement. Now, in this new world, we know that we need to engage each other in new ways. Historically, Conscious Capitalism, Inc. has not held many virtual events or activities, but we're adapting to this new world like everyone else, and so are hosting these regular virtual gatherings, ranging from introductions to conscious capitalism for those who are new to the community, to examples of conscious capitalism in practice from leaders in the community, to discussions on important issues related to elevating humanity through business. Now, as a quick note for everyone before we get into the meat of today's conversation, this call is scheduled to go for about 45 minutes. So look for it to end at about the 45-minute mark. Tim and Kit are going to kick things off for the next 30 minutes with a conversation between themselves, but then we'll transition to questions. So at any point, if you have a question that you would like them to answer or elaborate on, type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. Now, today, it is my honor to introduce Tim Cynova, the co-CEO for Fractured Atlas, and Kit Hughes, the CEO of Look Listen. Both have asked that I provide just short introductions so that they have more room to go into their discussion on this important topic. So all I'll say is that Tim is a CEO, consultant, educator, podcaster, connoisseur of both bourbon and artisanal donuts, and is dedicated to co-creating anti-racist workplaces where everyone can thrive. And Kit is an artist, a music maker, a designer turned CEO. His early work observed the inequality and dynamics in racial power and business power structures, and as CEO, he has tried to embody building a company as a spiritual pursuit. Tim, Kit, thank you so much for joining the Conscious Capitalism community today to share your insights, your lessons on this important issue with all of us.
Thanks, Alexander. Thanks to you and the team. This has been really great leading up to this conversation. So I'm really excited to be here with Kit.
Likewise, yeah.
So Kit, amidst pandemic and everything that's going on in the world today, how are you?
I feel like that's a question that you really don't want the answer to, or you may be asking me that, and maybe we don't have enough time to go into it, because I'm hanging in there. I mean, I think that the role of a CEO is to you have to grapple with a lot of things. You have to manage your business. You have to manage your own self. You need to be there for your people. And if you have a family like I do, and children, you're dealing with a whole other sort of set. And so hanging in there is like the best all-encompassing, because while we're all in the same boat, there's definitely an extra bit of sort of pressure and responsibility and accountability a CEO has at this time. So I'll return the pleasantry and the favor. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, all things considered, and it feels like every day there's more stuff to consider. But I'm fortunate and healthy, and I think fine. There's a lot, but really privileged to be able to spend time with you and the community today to talk about what we both believe is a really important topic. was reflecting on how we both met each other. So we don't know each other all that well. We met last year at the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit, and we had a brief chat in the hallway after a session in which you asked a question about where diversity and inclusion, how that's part of the Conscious Capitalism framework. And I heard that. It was like, totally need to connect with this person. But other than that, and some Googling and stuff in our recent conversations, we don't know each other well, but found out we grew up about 2 hours away from each other in the Midwest. Both went to art schools, both are CEOs, both are white guys. I also
kind of look
discovered
alike. We have the same
it's true.
similar glasses, and
unshaven look. Yeah.
I
I discovered being an orchestral trombonist, which honestly is, let's be honest, is a sexy instrument. But I discovered that you were a punk rock musician, so you likely were and probably still are far cooler than I am. So that's a little humbling. But I guess we should pivot into the conversation here. When we were prepping, your team
I'm just letting you do your thing, man.
Oh, this great.
Yeah.
When we were prepping for the conversation, your team tossed us the question for both of us to answer. Why should people listen to two white guys on this topic?
Yeah.
I reflexively said maybe they shouldn't.
Which I loved. I loved your answer. Yeah.
Well, and I love sort of how you broke it down too. What do you remember what you said?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, all kidding aside, so if everybody suffered through the initial pleasantries that we just had, I want to make sure that we're setting the right sort of tone and pulse here. That we are two people that are are incredibly dedicated and feel very passionate about this specific topic. I actually commend you for what you've done with your professional life and actually dedicating to help other companies figure this out. And I'll also admit that I think that you and I kind of come from a slightly different angle here, where I do, to give you some credit too, I think you may be more read than I am, and I think because of you being a consultant in this space, I think there's a bit more sort of surface area exposure that you get to the topic. I personally came out of a background where I had a passion, a fire for this kind of thing. And I think I spent years trying to figure out how to express it. And at one point, even wondering if I should go to law school, but being dyslexic and having trouble sitting in maybe incredibly long lectures and reading volumes, I realized law school wasn't for me. And then once I realized that CEOs actually hold a tremendous amount of power to affect change, and this was many years ago, as we were shaping our company very early on with a handful of people, and then you fast forward to today, and then you understand how many lives you start to affect by the decisions that you make. And if you believe in a stakeholder community, being your clients or customers and your employees, their families, the communities that you live in, you have a tremendous amount of reach and an impact. So when it comes to the concept of what are you doing from an anti-racism perspective, or if you take more of the traditional terminology of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you not only have a level of responsibility, but you have a tremendous way to using a company as a conduit for helping to affect that change. So I kind of an answer to your question, when you answered that maybe they shouldn't, and we published that blog post kind of trying to till up some of that side of the conversation. I firmly believe that we as CEOs have a responsibility and accountability, as I said, but also there's a tremendous amount of conversation that happens between two men that look like me and you, or I should just say sort of two people that follow this sort of criteria. This is the kind of thing that should be happening among other white male CEOs, is that they should, in a way that's not defensive, but exploratory, to try to understand, okay, what are you doing? Here's what I'm doing. Here's what we're testing. Let's share notes. Let's understand a bit more. I firmly believe that there are a lot more conversations that should be happening in this sort of format between, me and you that are out there than actually probably are.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think learning is foundational to the work. And we all have our lived experience, and the lived experience that I can speak to is of a white cisgendered heterosexual man who's in a position of relative power and has privilege. And I think when I started in this journey of understanding privilege and racism and oppression, how it's really embedded in organizations, there were few people that I could talk to who were like me, who I felt were sort of further along on the journey. And it sort of was this journey of piecing together, what do I need to read? Who can I talk to? And I think that's one of the really important things, if it's an unofficial caucus, if you will, about people who share that lived experience, and also the responsibility that we have in being white men in roles of leadership, to do this work. And I think, we've talked about, or I've certainly talked about, you've listened, about how understanding racism and oppression is a core leadership competency that can't be ignored anymore.
Yeah.
It's if ever it could, it's something that if you're truly understanding systems of oppression and racism and how they impact your organization, how they impact the people that work with you, then you can't truly understand it unless you're doing the work yourself on a personal level. And I know your journey started far earlier than mine. When we talked about it, you spoke about, I said, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I really dove into this along with my organization. Yours goes back to school, and I'm earlier in school, and I'm really curious how that sort of came about to you. Maybe what clicked, what were you hearing, what were you doing that you felt like this was really something that you wanted to explore and also create art based on that.
Yeah, well, thank you for, I guess, recognizing that it did start early on. And I'd love to get to my failures in how I've embodied it in my company in just a minute. But I don't know where the source of it came from. It just always, it felt wrong. It seemed wrong to me. And growing up in a predominantly white community in Western Kentucky, and not understanding this sort of this racist power structure that existed, and really struggling with it all. And then as I went off to college and started to make art, and I believe it was 1998 that I produced a piece of artwork called "The History of White People in America." And the university that I was attending at the time told me that I couldn't do that project. And their main reason was because I was white, and being white, I could not sort of shine a light on these sort of racism. It wasn't my role to shine the light or to even be involved in the dialogue in a way. And I think that just shows the inherent, and this was a primarily white institution. And so I think that it speaks to things like a fear among white people in power to really talk about some of these issues and to be reflective of their role in it. And it may be a passive role, and it may not be actually something that they're actively understanding. But I think that's the incredible problem with white privilege, is that you don't know that you're sort of a benefactor of most of those aspects. And so I think that's where the journey started for me, was that it started to just resonate early on that I couldn't even use art as an appropriate dialogue, which is what I believe a huge purpose of art is to inspire dialogue, not just to create commentary, but to really to stir up that. And so I think what I did was, over a period of years, I started to compartmentalize because of that experience, and later went to another university that I'm very proud to have attended. But I had a project that I did called Colored, and in which it was trying to examine universities' histories with segregation, and that was in the 2000s, and so 15 or so years ago. And they told me, or at least some of the people in the university told me, that I couldn't do that then, and it was sort of butting up against the system that existed. And so So I think and then I started to really get serious in business and started to sort of realize that, I wanted to elevate humanity through business, all these things that we talk about in conscious capitalism. And what happened this year for me was I recognized that there was a bifurcating at this over a period of years that I felt very passionate about drawing attention and creating some level of racial reconciliation through artistic dialogue. And I was told no, no, no. And so I kind of put it over there to the side, and I made it disconnected from what I did in my profession and my daily life. And so this year, of course, we're all very aware that, and I hope it's okay that I use some of this language, because Tim, you're a little more polished than I am. I'm really passionate about this topic. We both are. But quite frankly, white people woke up this year because of George Floyd. And there was on a world stage, there was a great awakening that happened. And there was an awakening inside of my company. And for years, I'd been talking about some of our diversity that kind of got away from us as we got larger as a company. And then in our communities and our country, and then around the world, this awakening started to happen. And what I realized was that on the side, in either the artwork or the investments that I was making, and with my time and energy and money in minority businesses, that I had really disconnected that from how I was running part of the company and part of the core values. And so I like time traveled back to being an 18 and a 19-year-old and trying to do these projects that I was told no, that I couldn't do. And now fast forward to a CEO, where when you're the CEO, so I consider myself the president of the United States of Look Listen, my company. And I get to build this country inside for my employees and for all these stakeholders. And when you really look at it that way, you start to realize that you have that responsibility and accountability to create this worldview, especially with regards to inclusion and diversity. And that was the awakening that happened to me this year, was that I had failed. I had failed my company. I had failed my own passion to cut it and separate it from the company. So we have a road ahead of us to sort of reconcile that. So that's a long answer to your question. And I'd love for you to do the same and sort of jump in with some of your own journey too.
Well, I think I really appreciated that. I hadn't heard that before. And that's what I think is so special about hearing everyone's journey, because it's different. And we couldn't even take the same path if we were to do it over again. And because mine was very much tied to the organization that I was helping lead, and that I had helped build along the way. And so part of the process of understanding racism and privilege and oppression was that I was having to question policies that I had created that I thought were really great. And it was a really, fortunately, I have a meditative practice that allowed me then and still to sit with the discomfort that I felt. Why is this like, we wanted to build a place where we all wanted to work, and where we like drank at the office and then hung out afterwards, and had these different policies that we thought were really cool, and then started to understand, well, they weren't great for everyone, and they were actually sort of exclusionary to us trying to build a place where everyone could thrive. And then having to sort of untangle 5 years or more of my professional career and start to understand, okay, that thing that we thought was really good, that hiring process that we built, was actually pretty problematic to achieve what we thought we were trying to achieve. And so having to sit with that, tear it apart, and then co-create something that we felt was more fitting with where we wanted to be as an organization. That was really, I mean, it continues to play out in real time. It's a constant learning journey about things that you're working on. And so I think for me, it's I've had amazing colleagues, coworkers and colleagues who have been a part of this journey and helped me sort of point out things that were problematic, that we needed to change, in service of creating some place that better aligned with our commitment to be an anti-racist, anti-oppressive organization, to meet the needs of those we serve today and in the future. And I think that's one of the really exciting times that we live in, because we are living in the midst of pandemic and social revolution. We're in a country that is dealing with, some people are seeing systems for the first time that they've never seen before. They understand, we talk about systems change, but they're seeing it for the first time. We're having conversations about racism, and the impossible of, April or, February is now possible. We can actually come together to co-create a future where everyone thrives. And I think, to your point about sort of it in February, March, I would explain to people what I do, sort of the work of helping organizations understand racism and oppression. And a lot of people would be like, why? Isn't that sort of discontinuous with what you're supposed to do? That seems sort of out of scope for what an organization should be doing. And then George Floyd was murdered. And all of a sudden the questions became, how do you do that thing? And it's been really heartening to have those conversations where people, white people in particular, are doing work that they haven't before. We've just lost Kit. Hopefully, all right, Kit is coming back. Great.
Cardinal sin of webinar. I didn't plug in my laptop to charge, and it's about to die. So.
Great. Well, I'll vamp for a little while longer. So I think that's, different places are sort of life and career, but coming to the point where, like, all right, so we're in organizations, what can we do? And back in June, Look Listen published your action plan for addressing systemic racism. And you talked about failures. I'm sort of talk about where Look Listen is right now. What have you done? What have you tried? You're like, we shouldn't have tried that. What do you want to do as it relates to this?
Well, and I'll start by saying that I want to clean maybe two things up before I launch into that. And by saying clean, I just some bookkeeping in the conversation here. It's my personal belief that if you are a white male in position of power, you have a responsibility, and you should be held accountable for not only turning whatever's in your jurisdiction, if it's a team, if it's a whole company, you have a responsibility to actually embrace what it means to be anti-racist, and to put those things into action over in any way possible at that moment in time, and an ongoing basis. But then I have an even more sort of like sense of purpose in it, which is the second piece, which is I also believe that it's our responsibility, fitting that classification, to also work very, very hard to undo over a period of time what has mounted up over centuries and centuries from people that look just like us that came before. So we need to clean some stuff up. And I would use more colorful language if we weren't on this. So hey, I'm just laying it out there on the table that I have a very deep personal passion that believes that. It's not for everybody, and I believe that other people believe other things, but I take it on as a personal sense of mission, because I believe that business is a spiritual pursuit. That's the way that I treat it, and so I'm looking to do that, and it also doesn't happen as fast as I want it to, because it's a human enterprise, and we're juggling a lot of things, and so. So I wanted to clean those couple things up. To answer your question very directly is we launched with making this sort of list very public so that we could be held accountable. And we had a version of that went out to everybody internally before we sent it out in our posted it on social media. And this week we're reporting out we do town halls every month. And so tomorrow actually is the monthly town hall in which we'll share the 10 things that we've done over the past 90 days. One of the things that we did was we hired a DEI consultant that I had been interviewing last year, and we looked to bring somebody on board. And so the timing was right for it. We had a few other things that we sort of pulled the lever on to say, we can do these things immediately, but we want to make sure that we are also being informed and led. And so I would say that, and we were very, very public. So that's like a huge thing too, is to disclose those things so that people can see and that you can be held accountable for. So a couple of the additional things that we're sharing is, I liken this to when you need to create a new like budget line item inside of your company. You need to be very thoughtful about it. You need to dedicate financial resources. But the one problem, and this is a white culture thing, the one thing that white people do when a problem or a catastrophe arises is they first think of financial. What can I write a check to make it go away? How can I solve it with money? That's a very white thing. And so what we sought to do was to not just rush to effectively sort of write checks, but say, we want to be the change as a company. I want to be the change as a CEO. And so I want to continue to go deeper and do the work myself, as you kind of talked about earlier. But then what's appropriate for our company, which is we're 40 to 50 employees. We have employees spread across 3 different time zones. And what's right for us? How fast can we move? And so we've got 10 things that we've tried to do in 90 days. And then we have a DEI council that's forming internally that is an action plan. And so what we want to do is to make sure that there's a group of people that have raised their hands internally and have said, we're committed to making this company more diverse and inclusive. And we want to examine our own processes, because I have a belief that we typical performance appraisals in companies that are taught in business school actually have a level of racism embedded into them. And I want to turn the sort of the spotlight on every piece of our own processes as a company, and be open and aware to the fact that we need to fix those. And so that's a smat. I know I jumped all over the place in that answer. But our focus was to say, okay, what can we do very quickly? We publish those things on social media, and then reporting out tomorrow on the 10 things that we've done in 90 days, which include things like creating a budget line item for this effort, saying we're financially committed to it, creating this council, which we committed to from the very, very beginning, making sure that we're engaging the right DEI consultant at the right time. So we went through an audit ourselves, had recommendations. Now we're going through evaluating trainers and advisors that can make sure that we're also, tracking to the appropriate action plan. So even if we take missteps, we're going to own it. We really are going to truly own any of these issues that surface up, because we want to be that change that we want to see in the rest of the world.
Well, I think also talking about the missteps, because those are learning moments for both for yourself and for other organizations. And I was relating to one of my co-CEOs, who's a Black woman, a couple of weeks ago. One of the things we did early on, she wasn't at the organization. We started out with this commitment to diversify our staff and board, and we weren't making any progress on it. It was just a bunch of white people, maybe one or two people of color. And I said, one of the things we tried was, we thought, what if we turn our headshots black and then we like alphabetize everyone versus having them hierarchically listed. She's like, that's a really stupid idea. We're like, yes, in hindsight, it was a really stupid idea, but we were very early in the journey. We were trying different things, and now I could talk or laugh like, yes, that was, what was that going to do? But talking about the struggles and the failures, and one of the things that comes up for us is, because I'm co-CEO of Fractured Atlas, and I'm also, as related to that work, I'm a consultant with Work Shouldn't Suck, that works with other organizations, and it's really wonderful to see both of those things together, and they sort of feed off of each other, and to have the conversations about what do you do, and sort of how do you go about doing it. It's been really, they benefited each other, and I guess one of the things that has come for us was the idea of race-based caucusing, things that we've done, and a lot of times people want to hear about the caucusing that we do, and it's about 5 years now. So we started relatively early, where we have a white caucus and a people of color caucus. They both meet once a month for an hour, and it's an opportunity with your coworkers to talk about racism and oppression in the organization. This is mainly for white people, and then the people of color caucus is structured differently. And there's so much learning that then comes from that, both personally and then tied to the organization, about yeah, we still need to do this thing better. This is what we should do. There's still oppression. There's still patriarchy. There's still power dynamics at play, even in a caucus. That's been one of the things that I think has benefited me most in the journey, is to have sort of coworkers, which is also, admittedly, I'm a CEO. And so there are power dynamics in that space, but recognizing that we're all sort of showing up for this hour to help each other in our journey and make the place better for those we serve, those we work with, and hopefully sort of I won't add that last part. I was going to say the world. That seems like very, very far-reaching, but in part of that is publishing about the journey and making it known about the things that we're working on and we're trying and doing, so people can learn from that.
Yeah, I love how you said that too, because I'm very transparent, and these are things that I've talked about in front of, you know, my company in town hall or in front of an audience on a panel. I'm not shy to say these things. I think that I think what you're saying too is that, like, look, we're going to make mistakes. We're all going to. What have we done in the past 90 days? The answer is not enough. What successes, early successes that we've had? The answer is not that many and not enough. What we need to admit is that this is an uphill battle, because we got here by this like downhill struggle of when I say we, I mean capitalism. I mean human systems that have disproportionately favored one race, one gender, one sexual orientation, and that's not right. This world isn't built for that. It's not natural. And so I firmly believe that you know, white male CEOs need to buckle up, and they need to buckle up because it should be a rough ride. There's a level of accountability that should be had right now. And like I said, what have we done? Not enough. But what we need to show is motion, and we need to be building momentum, and we need to try this thing and that thing. And you need to be laughed at for thinking that that's the right way is to do it this other way. Yeah. And here's the thing too, I'll play into your, and I know we need to take some questions here in just a second. I'll play into the point around like changing the world. This goes beyond the current fiscal year performance of our companies. All right. This is about the next generation's workforce. Like, look at your kids in the eye and try to explain to them the way that the world is today, and they will look back at you confused because it doesn't make sense to them. And so what we need to be doing is understanding that we have a level of responsibility, and we should be held accountable for helping to bring this change. And I think regrettably, it's going to take a much longer time than expected. I became a very big fan of Malcolm X when I was a teenager. And I think I was 14 years old, maybe, when I bought a CD of his speeches and listened to them over and over again. And what I found fascinating was he was definitely this sort of polarized figure from Martin Luther King Jr. And I live in Atlanta. I live in Atlanta for a reason, because of what MLK helped the city inspired to be, and what other leaders inspired the city to be, and the diversity that exists here. But there are many angles at which this thing needs to be looked at. And at that energy level that I had as a teenager, I really resonated with Malcolm X, and I still love By Any Means Necessary. And sometimes By Any Means Necessary means that there is a wearing down of this system over time, in which people that look like you and I aren't the ones. We're the ones that are saying, use our power to help be part of that change. And I don't want for that to sound abstract. I mean, if there's a CEO that's listening into this, they need to understand, they need to do the work themselves. They need to, like, there's a list of books that you can read. Yeah. Shame on you if you're not doing the work yourself, because your company can't do it. You need to treat this just as seriously as you are any other aspect of your planning. And I'll admit the failure that I've had in letting that kind of get away from me while focusing on the other CEO checklist items. And, even somebody that has a deep passion for it, it can still get away from you. So I just appreciate what you said, Tim, on that, because it just inspires, I think, a level of action, because it can be small, it can be big, but there needs to be action.
There's a great podcast series, Seeing White, by Seen on Radio. It's season 2. One of the co-hosts, Chandrai Komanika, was talking on one of the episodes and said, well, while white people are learning, which is important, Black people are dying.
Mm-hmm.
And as you point out, this is a lifelong journey that we're on, and it's a generational journey. We're not going, you didn't invent racism, I didn't invent racism. We're not going to do it in a webinar or workshop or even a couple of years. And seeing that arc, we are taking what's been given us before and giving it to someone else to address this. I think where I get really excited is this is innovation. This is innovation in organizations. We are creating something that does not exist and can do it in ways that fit our organizations. And so when people talk about innovative workplaces, this work is sort of core to innovation. And I think that's what's exciting, that you can go about this in a lot of different ways, and there's no one right way. There are wrong ways, but there are no one right way. And I think that's combined with recognizing that this is a lifelong journey, and we're never going to see the end of this, but it's the journey to be on, and it can be an exciting and fulfilling journey, all the same. And I feel like Alexander. Sorry, go ahead. But I feel like Alexander's going to pop. Oh, what? Alexander,
you're going to need to turn off our mics.
Sorry.
No, we want you to keep going, but ask and ye shall receive. We have a lot of questions from people listening in right now. And I want to start with Shannon's, who is wondering if you've experimented with any training practices that go beyond the theoretical and conceptual level and lean into ongoing practices that unearth conditioned tendencies and support behavior change. Are there any specific practices that you've either worked on or that you can recommend?
My answer to that is pretty short. Not yet. We're trying to roll out some training here before the end of the year that we want to experiment. Behavior change for us is absolutely huge. It's we believe fully in it, especially. I mean, it's cultural change management, which is behavior change for something like this. And we have not done it yet for me to be able to report back on any achievable results. Tim, I bet you have a better answer for her.
I think part of this is trying to figure out how to build this or embed this work at the DNA level of the organization. So it sort of goes beyond a workshop or an initiative, but where everyone feels like they have the agency to be a part of this work and can point out places that need to change or things we can do. At Fractured Atlas, we've done mandatory staff trainings. We spent an entire year looking at oppression. Then we've spent 2 years looking at racism. Our board has done the same thing. And that's what sort of led to the caucus structure, where I think some of what Shannon's asking comes into play. But when people start to feel like it's theirs, that they are owners in the organization and of this work, you start to see things like someone added their pronouns to their auto signature on their email, didn't ask anyone permission, didn't do anything. They just started doing it. And then other people started adding it. And then people have done this on Zoom too, where there's no like organizational directive to add pronouns to your name on Zoom, but it just sort of pops up. And then someone pointed out, most of our customer-facing staff are women of color, and a lot of this was several years ago. A lot of our staff are stuck on phone calls that are really oppressive and offensive and racist. We should do something about that. And when the CEO at the time said, "Why don't they just hang up?" The answer was they didn't know that was an option. And so we set out to create what we call the negative interactions protocol. And it's available on workshouldn'tsuck.co. You can download it, use it. It's public for anyone who deals with us. That includes up to and including organizational backed hang up if you engage in this type of behavior. And that's just one example of things that start to come out of the organization when we make space for the conversation to happen, and where people feel like it's part of their job to point out, this part of the hiring process has improved over time, but this seems a little skewed toward one type of candidate versus the other. So maybe we should ask all of our candidates to have, as we do all of our videos on Zoom, everyone has a blank background. Everyone has the same prep for the meeting before they come into an interview. So everyone's working from the same script and understand what's going to happen. And let's just make some more things explicit about how we work, what we think, and how we interact with people we serve. I realized that might not have answered all of what Shannon was asking, but hopefully, Shannon, there was a little bit in there that was worth taking away.
Thank you. Now, I want to go to a question from Morgan, who says that they're from South Africa, which, as you all know, has a very racially charged past, which seems very much to still be with us. Talking about race issues in the work environment just does not happen here. However, there is always an underlying racial charge in many work environments. How do we even get people to start talking about this at work without making people of any side feel threatened?
Tim, would you like to answer that first?
No, I'd like you to answer first by me time, but no, I will.
Well, I think it's a fantastic question, and one in which I don't have a great answer to. I don't have an answer. I've got maybe a couple of off-the-cuff ideas. This kind of, I look at where the U.S. is today, and we wouldn't be having this conversation, this webinar, if it weren't for especially a concentrated series of events. I think also a level of sensitivity that we're all under in this pandemic. There's a rawness to people emotionally too. So I think that there is a perfect storm, but every country, every locale is experiencing at their own level and with their own history in tow. What I did early on was I found very quickly the people that felt the same way that I did, and I went to them for refuge. Because a lot of people don't understand that being a white male is, well, I think a lot of people do understand that it comes off, there's a power to it, but also there's a secret society in which things are discussed behind closed doors, in which would not be conversations that would not happen with mixed company in the room. And which I don't know if that translates outside of the US, but mixed company usually means male, female, or just, different gender, different racial mixes. And in which, are the most racist comments and the most, these kind of things in which, well, you understand because you look like me. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, friend, I'm not like you. I may look like you, but I'm not like you. And so what I found was that in some of those conversations, the people that didn't speak up and participate in the joking, that didn't speak up and participate in some of the colluding, were the ones that I sought out. And then behind sort of another closed door said, I caught sort of some integrity with you in that moment. And it just jumped out. Am I wrong that if you look for the people that are quiet in those moments, there's a chance that you have sort of an underground network sort of forming in which you can actually seek refuge in those people and have those conversations. Real change is going to happen from a groundswell. And so I found that by identifying those other people that felt the same way from me, it was a safe place to have those conversations in order to sort of energize me, because this topic can be just, you can feel like you're hitting a wall over and over and over again, especially in an environment where you don't have like-minded thinkers. So I'm only a few decades into this, and I'm at a point of privilege, but I know that I struggled to sort of find even people that, kind of that thought the same way that I did, because I was looking for other white males. And Tim pointed out, I asked a question at the end of a session, and he said, he kind of like, we bumped in the hallway afterwards a year ago after I asked this question at the end of a session, because he said, okay, that guy looks like me. and he feels the same way, and he's passionate about the same thing about me. And we had a hallway conversation that keeps us connected to this day. So it's not this is the kind of thing that's not a silver bullet, but I think it's a lot of lead bullets. And one of those lead bullets is finding that camaraderie with people to help to energize you and to keep you strong throughout a very, very long road.
There's a statistic or research study that was highlighted in Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago. And the statistic that sticks with me is that in the US, 36% of our Black colleagues feel that it's never acceptable to talk about their experience of bias. And this is their experience of bias in life, but it's unacceptable. They feel it's unacceptable to talk about their experience of bias in the workplace. And so while we have different geographic and national borders here, I think there's similarities. And I think there are a couple of things. Yes, if psychological safety isn't there, the amazing work of Amy C. Edmondson around psychological safety and teams and trust, if that's not there, people aren't going to speak up. If leaders aren't driving the work, if you can't see that your leadership is actually committed to this, then it's not going to be safe. So what to do? There's in work, there's out of work. So we have an organizational sponsored caucus, but people on staff, that's not the only place where they caucus. There's different kinds of affinity groups where they come together for support. And there's also, I think there's also the better to ask forgiveness than permission sometimes. To meet with like-minded colleagues or people who feel the same way in your organization might be one way to start exploring topics. But it's a challenging place, and I think there's a lot of different things and a lot of things to try. But thanks for going first on the one, Kit. I appreciate
and Morgan, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you my phone number, and you can text me whenever you're feeling down, and I'll text you back, and I'll try to build you up. I mean, this issue is hand-to-hand combat. I hate to use destructive militaristic terminology, but we all have to stay strong in these conversations. I truly believe that, and I feel for the workplace situation that you must find yourself in, truly.
And we are actually already over time. This was such an amazing conversation. Kit and Tim, thank you so much for sharing these.
I mean, people probably want to hear one more question, right? I mean,
you have time.
I've got time. They'll drop off if they don't, if they have to go attend a call.
We'll keep you as long as we can.
Yeah, let's go. We're here.
So this is actually from an anonymous participant, but they're wondering, how do you accommodate for the time that's needed to change processes, and more importantly, when they're changed, knowing that we want this to happen quickly, but this does take time? How do you think about that when you're implementing change in your companies, and that others can think about as they consider this too?
Yeah, I mean, the CEO, especially if it's an entrepreneurial CEO like me, can sling ideas all the time. On this topic, what has to be acknowledged is that this is not a passing thing that we can just say it's a moment and in fact, I have grave concern that white people as a populace, a mainstream, is already moved on from George Floyd. I have an incredible fear around that. And that the moment of change for some companies and some individuals, the window may be closing. And I hope that I'm wrong. I really, truly do hope that I'm wrong. And so with when we talk about however you decide to package it, DEI, or you focus it specifically on diversity, this has to be understood that it's not something that is the 2020 initiative for the company. It's an initiative that was established in 2020 and shall proceed on forever as part of the culture of the company. And there must be given that level of dedication. Like I said, there needs to be a budget line item that's dedicated to it. You must always be evaluating. And to put the processes in place, our answer is we believe that this should be inclusive of our own employees' voices. So creating a DEI council that their own voices, and that they can sort of unpack and sort of work with some of these things and be part of it, and not make it just top down, but also bottom up. And the reaction that I received, and the ideas that were submitted, 20 people in my company, which is about half of our workforce, responded in June with ideas that generated a list of 60 ideas that our company could be working on. And we created patterns of those ideas. We brought in that DEI consultant to help us evaluate from a third-party standpoint. All these things I would consider we're pulling levers, but we need to always keep our hands on this to make sure, and to make sure that people know that we're serious about it. I truly do believe that if a CEO treats this, or a leader, let's scrub the title, if a leader understands the gravity of this, they must treat it as if it is the same way they measure their sales pipeline, the same way that they look at their financial pro forma, the same way that they appraise their employees. Because we invest into those frameworks. We research, we read books, we talk to our peers, we try to pull in all these different things in order to codify what an organization does in this area, that area, and the other. Well, this needs to follow that same kind of level of rigor and commitment, and should not, like I said, shouldn't be a 2020 only initiative right now. We should be able to look back and see that in 10 years, we invested in it appropriately over a 10-year period. It was an initiative that was established back then, and that it's proven to be fruitful for the company. I hope that was maybe tangible enough. Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's great. And I think there's small and large things. One of the things that I think is a stumbling block is when leaders start to do this work, they're like, we have to have the big plan to do this. And, you can start doing things right now. You can get off the phone, get off this call, and start introducing yourself with your pronouns. You can change an interview question in the interview to ask people, what's your definition of diversity, without using the word difference? Or how do you promote sensitivity and inclusion in the workplace? And that signals to people, I would have your answer. I would be prepared to answer that yourself if someone sends it back to you. But I think that starts to build it into the organization, so you don't have to have that big thing. And when it comes to the big thing, like any change initiative, there's the rip the Band-Aid off, or I sort of think of it as successive 5Ks, where some people could finish a 5K in 15 minutes and go right to the next 5K. Other people on staff are taking 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, the first one, and it's slower. And you have to judge sort of where the team is, but at a certain point, you just need to go. And maybe if you're going, introducing pay transparency, or pay parity, or something that really sort of goes deep into the organization, you don't want to do that, right as soon as you get off this call. But it depends what you're doing. There's small and large things. There's a giant spectrum that's possible, and that's what's so great. You just ask your other colleagues what they think you could do. And I'm reminded again of my colleague who I mentioned before, who thought that the black and white headshots was a really stupid idea. And I said, it's tough to know exactly what to do. And this suggestion is challenging because you don't want to shift the burden here. But she's like, you could have just asked a person of color on staff what you should do, and they would have given you a list of 15 things that you could have done to make the organization more inclusive and supportive of them. And so I think that suggestion, there's work that has to be done to not shift the burden onto those who are already shouldering it. But there's a lot of stuff we can do on different timeframes. And Alexander, I appreciate you going long on this one. This is great to take a couple more questions.
And if you're okay, I'd like to ask one more question from Robert, who says, we're talking a lot about leadership and recognizing the role of leadership. What's the best way to get alignment within the organization and with other stakeholders, perhaps outside of the organization, as you embark on this?
That's actually, I think that may even bring something up that I was going to include in my last answer, which the CEO role or another leadership role is incredibly nuanced and holistic. And part of announcing or doing any kind of initiative, you have to also rally. And in the U.S., we have in Congress, we have when we pass bills, there's this one role, the whip, that goes around and makes sure that everybody votes. And it's like, we know how you're going to vote, but you actually have to, let's get the votes in. And there's consensus building and all these things that the role of a leader has. And what I actually believe when it comes to actually making this kind of thing happen is that people aren't going to just do it because you tell them to. Also, people aren't going to be on board just because they've always been on board with the other ideas. And so I think that you have to roll up your sleeves and be prepared, because this is an incredibly sensitive topic. And most white people don't understand their own privilege. And so you have to be prepared to sit for long conversations. You have to be, and this is also why doing the work is very important yourself, so that you can have these conversations. And it's my personal belief that you have to be invested in the consensus building and being part of how this is tracking the performance, just like those other things I mentioned before, the way that you would measure and manage them to an end goal. Which is very business, to treat it in a very business perspective. But sometimes you're going to have to rally people, or you're going to have to re-energize them, and you may be tapped out. Your tank may be empty, but you're going to need to basically remind people of the passion and the mission and the sort of long-term vision of what you're trying to do with this initiative or inside your organization, in the same way that you would rally people around your own purpose as a company. And so I know that's how I'm going to tend to treat it, is that a year from now, after we're a little tired, or we're coming up, we're saying, well, half the DEI council fell off, or if we're dealing with those issues as a CEO, if I don't have a chief diversity officer on my payroll, I'm the chief diversity officer. That means that I'm held accountable. I'm responsible for making sure that we're driving against those goals. And I understand that as my responsibility. So I'm going to need to get the team, back engaged. I'm going to need to figure out how it's tracking. I've probably, if this were a drinking game, then the amount that I've said responsibility and accountability over this entire webinar has probably got somebody on the floor. But again, it goes back, you can feel passionate about it, but unless we're delivering on this ultimately and tracking it over time, it's energy that's going into oblivion. And I do believe there's consensus building in those things that I talked about to help keep people engaged. Tim, do you feel differently, or do you feel?
I would do a yes and.
Okay, great.
In the classic style of improv, which I'm horrible at, being a trombonist again. I think there are a couple of different levels here. One, I think you need to be prepared to say goodbye to people. Be prepared to say goodbye to people who have been incredible workers and really genuinely great people in the organization. But just like any organization as it's changing, the people who got you here might not be the ones to get you there. I tend to think of it as, so this is more higher level, and there's a couple tactical things you can do, but I tend to think of it as the unofficial employee-employer contract. I signed up to work for this innovative arts organization, or I signed up to work for this innovative software organization. I didn't sign up to work for an organization where we talked about racism. And that changes the contract. When talking about racism and oppression and white privilege and white fragility is part of it, you're going to lose people. We lost people. We lost board members, dear friends of mine. What people often don't get is you're losing people already, amazing people who actually want to be a part of that work by not doing the work. And I have some people who are now lifelong friends, or who will be lifelong friends, who wouldn't have joined an organization that wasn't doing this work. And I think that's something, as you talk alignment, sometimes to get that alignment, you need to say goodbye to people and welcome new people in. Tactically, ways we do this, we use the OKR process, and rather than having specific objectives and key results tied to anti-racism, anti-oppression, in the White Caucus, we use accountability buddies, not my word, but I've learned how to say it, where you work with someone else to say, all right, so I see your quarterly OKRs. Now, how can we use an anti-racism lens or an anti-oppression lens to make sure that it's embedded in the work? Another thing that we do is we share our board report unredacted to staff, and we take anonymized questions in real time during our monthly staff meetings. And a lot of those questions are, I see that this happened around laying some people off. Where was equity in that conversation? It seems like we're not doing very well on hiring people of color. Can you talk to that? And those questions go directly to our CEO group, and they're in the moment we're answering that. And I think that's another way that we can show that this is important. And some of the answers are like, yes, that was a challenging thing to do. We're not doing very well. But this is a way to embed this tactically into the organization's operations so that you can have alignment, because transparency around decision-making, around information, allows people to make better decisions and see how they're working in the context of that. So I think, so yes, and to you, Kit, and then a couple of tactical things for the mix.
I loved what you said. I would ditto I loved how you packaged that. I think you did a much better job than I did.
And I think that is a great note to end on. There's just so much wisdom in this conversation, and I'd love for us to continue this on our own afterwards, and really appreciate you, Kit, already saying that you're willing to talk with any other participants on here. And just want to say again, thank you for being Conscious Capitalists and having this conversation with the community.